Hi everyone. Today we will discuss about how the current state of global environmental cooperation. Current state of global environmental cooperation is a joint action between two or more actors of having shared interests or effort for a further prosperous and sustainable environmental. Every country in the world has a strong hold on certain aspects. However, it does not limit the state to interact with each other, and it had established an international organization in which its formation encourages a more cooperative form of cooperation among member states. The cooperative is important to achieve certain goals and to sharing common interests. For an example is the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, Control of Targeted Chemicals, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES, of Wild Fauna and Flora, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. So, in order to analyze the current states of global environmental cooperation, these three approaches will be explored details throughout this presentation.
First is United Nations Environment Programme, the voice for the environment within the United Nations system. UNEP mission is to provide leadership and encourage partnership in caring for the environment by inspiring, informing, and enabling nations and peoples to improve their quality of life without missing that of future generations. What is UNEP? The United Nations Environment Programme is an agency of the United Nations that coordinates its environmental activities, assisting developing countries in implementing environmentally sound policies and practices. What UNEP does? First, assessing global, regional and national environmental conditions and trends. Second, developing international agreements and national environmental instruments. Next, strengthening institutions for the wise management of the environment. Other that, encouraging new partnerships and mindsets within civil society and the private sector. In harmful substances and hazardous waste. UNEP objective is to minimize the impact of harmful substance and hazardous waste on the environment and people. UNEP achieves this through three core services. First, assesses trends in the use, release and disposal of harmful substances around the world to inform policymakers and raise awareness on the need for action. Second, helps governments use data and information in these global assessments to make informed decisions. Lastly, helps governments monitor, evaluate and report on the impacts and progress of their systems for managing harmful substances and hazardous waste. And, UNEP helps countries manage the life cycles of chemical substances and waste that could pose a threat to the environment and human health. Management of chemicals. Control of targeted chemicals. First, reducing risk from mercury. An important step forward towards eliminating the use of one of the world's most toxic heavy metals, mercury, was taken in June 2010. UNEP, serving as the Secretariat, convened the first session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to prepare a global legally binding instrument on mercury, INCI. UNEP recognizes that it all will be some time before a legally binding instrument comes into force. Second, chemical at sea. Harmful substance and waste generated on land find their way into waterways and are transferred to marine and coastal environments. The Global Programme of Action for the Protection of the Marine Environment from Land-Based Activities, GPA Marine, is the only global intergovernmental initiative directly addressing the link between watersheds, coastal water and the open ocean.
Next is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES. This convention, also known as Washington Convention, had been established in 1973. CITES is a multilateral treaty to protect endangered plants and animals. Its aim is to ensure that international trade in specimens of wild animals and plants does not threaten the survival of the species in the wild, and it accords varying degrees of protection to more than 35,000 species of animals and plants. In order to ensure that the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade GATT was not violated, the Secretariat of GATT was consulted during the drafting process. CITES is one of the largest and oldest conservation and sustainable use agreements in existence. Participation is voluntary, and countries that have agreed to be bound by the convention are known as parties. Although CITES is legally binding on the parties, it does not take the place of national laws. Now CITES has been ratified over 183 members country. This convention have 3 appendix, which is Appendix 1, species of threatened animal of extinction and provide the greatest level of protection such as gorilla, sea turtles, lady slipper orchids, and giant pandas. Appendix 2, currently not threatened with extinction, but may become extinct without trade controls. Appendix 3, includes species for which a range country has asked other parties to help in controlling international trade such as map turtles, walruses, and Cape stag beetles. How this does CITES work? CITES works by subjecting international trade in specimens of selected species to certain controls, which include all import, export, re-exports, and introduction of a particular species in an area are covered by the convention has to be authorized through a licensing system. So import and export of certain species which are mentioned by convention should get the license before taking in international trade. Each party to the convention must designate one or more management authorities in charge of administrating that licensing system, and one or more scientific authorities advise them on the effects of trade on the status of the species. Even though it is successful in regulating the international trade, CITES also has various limitations because this CITES has no enforcement authority of their own. It has to depends on the member countries for the enforcement of its rules and regulations. So CITES do not have their own enforcement agency, so it has to depend on the member countries. Second is, under the convention, various plants and animal species are seized because of illegalities, and this animal and plant are released into the non-native areas itself without bringing them into the original ecosystem. Third is, the over-restriction in the international trade is fueling the black marketing in the trade of plants and animals. This including rhino horn, tiger bone, and elephant ivory.
Third is, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. Highlighted issues that contribute to global relations, including addressing issue of environmental cooperation. Through ASEAN, the current state of global environmental cooperation will be discussed, as it's hard for countries solving the environmental pollution alone. The strategic and major role of current ASEAN environmental cooperation. One of it is ASEAN Way. Through ASEAN Way, the planning of haze-free ASEAN by 2020 requires ASEAN environment ministers attending 11th Conference of Parties in 2015. This is to express concern over the unprecedented severity and geographical spread of the recent smoke haze in Indonesia 2015. Second is through the Plan of Action, POA, 2016 that stress on the ASEAN cooperation regarding the forest and climate change. Besides, a consensus joint approaches in addressing regional and international towards the forestry also being the main part of POA, together with the United Nations Forum on Forest, UNFF. Third is the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution, AATHP. Through AATHP, the roadmap on ASEAN cooperation towards transboundary haze pollution control with means of implementation had been stressed on. Thus, AATHP ASEAN utilizing an advanced modeling systems and latest satellite technology through the 5-year Regional Capacity Development Program aimed of the technical knowledge. The current state of global environmental cooperation also can be analyzed through the cooperation of youth. ASEAN Center for Biodiversity launched the Youth Biodiversity Conservation Program, AYBP, and ASEAN Biodiversity Heroes Regional Forum on the 4th of September in Makati City, Philippines. Not just that, but ASEAN +3 Youth Environment Forum, AYEF, that is being supervised by ASEAN Working Group on Environmental Education, AWGE, proved that current global cooperation had speeding the environmental awareness. The European Union, EU, acknowledged the ASEAN Global Environmental Cooperation as E.U. support the ASEAN Centre for Biodiversity, ACB, towards ASEAN-wide photo competition. The upmost theme is capturing the richness of biological resources, health concerning about the environment preservation. Thus it had calls on all photographers of nature enthusiasts into the Zooming in Biodiversity program to boosting up the current cooperation up to the sustainable development of environment together to put our Mother Earth ecosystem friendly forever.
As a conclusion, all actors need to be eager in protecting environment, not just depend on the global cooperation only. Thus, in order to emphasizing the current state cooperation, it also included the major role and sustainability effort to setting the intermediate target featuring the environment preservation. With this, years by years, although various issues of environmental pollution arise, the tackling of cooperation can be seen in clearer way by implementing environment policies be worthy.